welcome to Your Financial Journey, the podcast that shares the inside stories of individuals, their successes, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Today, I have the pleasure of an amazing guest. I'm really looking forward to interviewing Vivi Friedgut. She is the founder of Blackbullion. It's a digital platform, educational platform that is, looking to inspire and help the masses. And she is the author of Stay Financially Healthy, a book that has recently been released in March. I've got my copy here, and it's lovely, it's appealing, and it's pocket-sized. So really great read. I would say much more. There's plenty more that I could say, but I want to get straight into it because there's lots that you can hear and there's lots that Vivi has to share. Welcome to episode 3, Your Financial Journey. The topic today is why it's important to teach financial education from birth. And you heard it right, from birth. So while you're teaching ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, your children should also be learning about money. And we're going to be explaining exactly why and the importance of that. So welcome, Vivi. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well. Thank you for having me. Episode 3, I'm very excited.
Yes, me too. It's much exciting stuff. I'm going to, first of all, touch upon something that we have in common, which I do with all of my guests. And one of those aspects is we are super passionate about, helping younger people learn about financial education. And I know that you are just, I said you've been running with the kind of flag and the kind of burner because you've been working so hard in that industry. And I'm so proud to see that. It's a joy because I think we will touch upon it, but there are so much benefits of learning about financial education from young and not leaving it till adult stages. So that is our thing that we've got in common. Love that. I'm going to dive in with a great topical question, a bit of a statistic here. So a recent study kind of stated that 89% of students feel that they leave school or education with limiting financial education. What are your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's horrifying, right? Like it's basically almost every single student. It's something we have to tackle. So, I'm a big believer in things haven't been great, but tomorrow can be better. So we got to kind of focus on the fact that we can make a change to this, and we are making a change to it. But the advantage, quote, air quotes, the advantage that we had, those of us that are a little bit older, was it was harder to get into the kind of trouble that today's generation of students can get into when it comes to finances. It was nearly impossible. I graduated university almost 20 years ago. It would have been nearly impossible to come out of university in catastrophic financial problems. And today's students can, because of gambling, because of online trading, because of all of these mechanisms. So that statistic, we have to bring that down for their mental health, for their financial health, for our national health as an economy. And we have to tackle this, but I'm optimistic that we can. So I come into it with that kind of viewpoint, but it is really worrying.
Totally agree. And those are some of the shocking things and I suppose the disadvantages. Can you share with us some of the advantages of actually having that financial education from a school set? We're gonna touch upon why it should be actually discussed way before school. But let's just look inside the education system. What are the benefits of that being taught?
Yes, I think that it's wide-ranging benefits, everything from mental health through to physical health through to kind of financial futures. But looking at some real specific examples, people who are more financially savvy are more likely to make better decisions for themselves in the shorter and the longer term. So one of the things that I'm quite concerned about is the choices post high school, right? So do you go to university? Do you go to college? Do you go into an apprenticeship? Making that decision is actually really hard. We're lacking a lot of the information around what's going to be best. And what concerns me is that students who have the talent and the skill and the desire to go to university, for example, are not going to university because they're worried about money. And young people who university might not be the right thing for them are going to university because they don't know about the alternatives. And so if we learn about finance and financial consequences and financial risk much earlier on, we're more likely to make better decisions when graduating secondary school, for example, less likely to get into gambling trouble, less likely to do online trading that I'm sure we're going to touch on on. So it just sets people up kind of for better decision making. And I think the mental health issue is huge. So we've got young people who are panicked about the future in ways that young people shouldn't be panicked about the future because they are so worried about money. So I think it does touch on every single element of a young person's life, and not just young, but as you said, particularly for young people.
So true, and it definitely agree with, it lays the foundation, and it also the financial well-being, which hopefully we'll touch upon throughout this conversation, but that's so key. So tell me a bit about Blackbullion and how your financial digital platform helps eradicate some of these statistics, and and help students.
We hope, right? It's the goal. It's definitely the goal. So I started,
Yes.
I started Blackbullion because I think that we need to bring money to the forefront. We need to talk about it in more meaningful ways. We need to destigmatize the language. We need to decomplicate the language. I mean, you obviously from a financial background, me as well, kind of from wealth management background, we've made finance super complicated. And in a sense, it's because it serves the industry. If people feel they don't understand, they're more likely to get an advisor rather than getting an advisor, because an advisor can be a guide on the journey, which is really what financial advisors should be for. And so I looked into the different ways in which we can help people to do it. And the kind of the easiest was for people to be able to learn at their own speed, at their own pace, in their own place, at their own time. And so doing it digitally and having it in your, having it in your pocket kind of made all of the difference. And we work with universities and increasingly beyond universities to put it into people's hands, to put the power of financial knowledge in their hands, so people can learn at their own pace. Our lessons are 2 to 3 minutes long, so it's not anything massively intensive. You can literally do it while waiting for a bus, back in the days when we waited for buses. And really the idea was to destigmatize, keep the language really colloquial, explain things in a very simple way, use metaphor, use social social imagery, to really just enable people to have the language to be able to ask the questions. We don't all have the answers to things, and that's okay, but if we can't ask the question, then you can't move forward. So that was kind of the dream. And slowly where we've got 100,000 over 100,000 users now. We work with dozens of universities across Australia, UK, and New Zealand. So people are open and really desiring having these conversations. We're just proud to be part of the movement that's bringing it to life.
Fantastic. And I think that just absolutely resonates with everything that I spread and share about in all of my content, in terms of just keeping things simple, straightforward and somewhat fun, because I believe that you've got to be open about the finances. So tell me about how the students have received this new digital information, because it is very new to them. Digital and tech's very new, and also the finance aspect of it. So how are they receiving this information?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we've been delighted with the uptake, and it's really interesting. We see two different types of students that use our platform. So there are students who are in kind of desperate need, and they are logging in at like 2 a.m. Like we have a fairly chunky percentage of our users who are using the platform between midnight and 5 a.m. Now, you and I both know that if you are financially kind of sorted, doesn't necessarily mean you're in a good position, but you've got it in control, you sleep better. And the first thing to go when you have financial difficulty is like a good night's sleep. So we know that if you're logging into our platform between midnight and 5 a.m., either you've just come back from the club, in which case, good for you, but more likely you're stressing, and this is a good time to learn. So we have kind of that category of students. And then we have very aspirational students who are, kind of feel like they've got everything under control, but want to learn about crypto, want to learn about investing, want to learn about mortgages. And this is a nice, easy, non-judgmental way to kind of get the information. So we've been really pleased. I mean, our goal is to reach every single young person in the country. So there is still a long way to go. But the feedback that we get from students, will get comments like, "You've changed my life." And, much like you, these are the kind of comments that we live for. It's why we do what we do. But there are still people who are scared of the language and are scared of the topic. So it's important to keep doing what we're doing, all of us together.
So true, absolutely true. I think it's one of those things that you seem so passionate about, you know, what you're doing right now. And I know that definitely stems from somewhere. So tell me a bit about your journey. How did this start? What ignited this fuel in you to start Black Bullion?
Yeah, I've been really lucky because this fire was lit by others, it was lit by my parents, and I've just kind of carried the torch, to take the metaphor. But my mom has always been obsessed by financial well-being, although that's not what it was called, right? But the idea of especially her daughter understanding money was something that was very important to my mom. And as a consequence, both of my brothers and I were kind of taught this stuff literally at the dinner table, which is why I joke that it's the kind of thing you should learn right from the beginning. We used to talk about money around the dinner table, and what is money for, and how do you get it, and how do you watch it, and how do you protect it, and how do you protect your family, and kind of, so I was raised with this kind of, you know, with mother's milk. And it's always been, I don't even like to use the word passion, because I think it's an obsession more than a passion. But you couldn't make a business out of it. There was nobody cared about this stuff. It was a nice thing that charities were doing kind of in the corner. And then post the financial crisis in 2008, it was for me a kind of a moment of, well, if ever this is going to be important, it's going to be important now. Like, if ever this is going to work, it's going to work now. It took me a few years to get off the ground, because I was still working, and, you know, how do you pay your bills and all of that stuff. But I kind of thought, well, let's give this a go. I fully expected it to fail. I had like a whole plan for failure. I had like a spreadsheet with like who gets what books, and I'll sell the house, and I'll go back to Australia and go back into banking. Like, there was a whole, but actually it was the right idea at the right moment. So it's been a hard slog, but my general advice to anybody is, if you're really determined to do something, just do it, because if it's the right moment, it'll happen. And if it's not the right moment, at least you tried. But I had to at least try, and I'm kind of glad that I did, obviously. But it hasn't been an easy journey.
Sounds it. You've I've got to go right back to when you mentioned talking about money at the dinner table. Can you just share a bit of what that was like, how you perceived that at age 6? You know, you remember as young as listening and talking about money. So tell me how you perceived it at that age, and what you took on, but also how that's changed you to the way you act with money today.
Yeah, look, I think it's the formative, those formative years have shaped my entire financial attitude, right? I mean, I mean, when I was 6, I started my own business. When I was 6, that's what the significance of the 6 age is, which just to this day makes me laugh. But we used to talk about stuff around the dinner table. So, for example, like, we used to go shopping as a family, and my mum would say, right, we need baked beans, like, pick the baked beans that we should buy. And it was like, oh, you realize if you look down the shelf or at the top of the shelf, and of course, when you're this tall, you know, everything's above your eye level, but, you know, the cheaper things will be at the bottom and the top. And understanding 2 for 1, is it really a deal, by doing the math, you know, by doing the maths and by doing the calculations, having to learn all the different elements of money. So, you know, utility bills. So we used to turn the lights off, not because Dad used to yell, but because it used to cost the family money, and we understood that. So it was about bringing the whole of money into real life. And I made my first stock purchase when I was 15, and by then I was hooked, because the stock market, as you I'm sure believe, it's like fun. It's like not just making money, but actually it's like, it's fun. And if you do it safely, then you can make money and enjoy it at the same time. So it's done, my whole life has been, you know, has been guided by these very early messages. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, so there's a few mind-blowing stuff there, you know, starting a business at 6, investing firstly at 15 is just like, who does that, you know? So I think definitely those things, I mean, by the time you was of a legal age of 18, you've already achieved most major stuff that some people struggle to achieve even in later years. So well done to you with that. And
well done to my mom.
Yes, I was just going to say shout out to mom, because I love the fact about the shopping list and actually, you know, picking things on the shopping list and looking at that and looking what's put on the higher shelves. I just think that that's fantastic, because money doesn't have to be complicated, and it is the actual simple things that sometimes installs some of the greatest financial foundations in one's future. And talking about, going back to the title in terms of why it should be taught from birth, they say that even when you're pregnant, you know, a child starts learning from like 23 weeks while in the womb. You know, and that's why they say people read, and they say if you constantly read while the child's in the belly, they will come out very intelligent. Whether that's true or not, I'm not entirely sure. But children almost adopt what they see, don't they? They imitate what goes on around them, how you react to opening bills, how you react to shopping, the dealing with utility bills, and a number of other things. And I think that's what's key and important. So I absolutely love that. But
yeah,
going back to the birth,
Hmm.
what's some of your top tips as to why it shouldn't just be left to schools? Because I know you was very passionate about that, and I think part of that has definitely come from your personal experience. But why, in your opinion, should it be taught from home?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of it is just really practical, right? Like once you go to school, there are so many things to learn at school, and I really do have enormous sympathy for teachers, because we want and expect our teachers to teach kids everything, and that's not really a teacher's job, right? So I would rather we had a generation of kids that could read and write. I mean, we still have quite high functional illiteracy and innumeracy rates. I'd rather teachers were focusing on the real fundamentals, but also because I don't think financial literacy is a subject. I think it is just life. It's just how you make life smoother. And if it's taught as a subject, you're less likely to see it as holistic and touching every element of your life. Whereas if you learn it at home and you learn it early, then it is about shopping. It is about the electricity. It is about what clothes you buy. It is about, how you support causes, and do you put money into charity or not? So it really is an all-encompassing thing. And if it's taught as such, then that's how you'll see it. If you do it at school, it becomes about maths. And that's a real problem, because you and I both know finance is a lot less about maths than it is about attitude. And that's part of the reason why we have this discrepancy between boys and girls, because girls are more likely to think that they're not good at maths. And if they're not good at maths, then they must be bad with money. And I just think that's a very dangerous and completely inaccurate view. So the earlier we start, the more likely it is to just be regular life. And that's unfortunately how money actually works.
So true. And it's sad but true, because sometimes people end up learning the hard way. If you don't have that level of foundation put in place from home, sometimes it could almost be like a domino effect. So your parents have never spoken to you about money. It's quite natural that you are very closed about discussing money as well as an individual. So I just think the more open you can be in the household and be more transparent with money, it almost helps children to feel comfortable with talking about money, because it's just like any other topic, right? It shouldn't be any different, but people do alienate kind of money and finance. But it's part of our everyday lives, and it's one of those things where we do have to just accept, as you mentioned, it's part of life. It's one of the basic necessities that everyone needs to learn. So touching upon that, I love the fact that you started the business at 6 years old. And what business was that? Just let us know.
It was a school.
I'm going to keep going back to that. A school. Oh gosh.
I was teaching 4-year-olds maths,
Wow.
which I just think today is hysterical. But I was teaching 4-year-olds maths, and it was 30 kids. 30 kids.
Wow.
And Michaela, I was doing it for free. I could have retired by the time I was 15, and I did it as a social enterprise. I mean, honestly, what was I thinking? But yeah, it ran for 12 months. So it's like pretty impressive for a little 6-year-old.
Wow. I mean, so that must have made it really quite of a rollover effect for when it must have almost been like, what was it, Sixth Sense actually starting the Blackbullion. So tell me about your success and how you define success.
Well, how I define success is about basically having the freedom to do what you want to do and what drives you. I don't think that I would not count myself as a success yet. I feel like there are elements of my life where I'm successful. But I wouldn't say that the business is yet a success, because we have not yet achieved our objective, which is to ensure that there is effective and efficient and fun financial well-being in every young person in the country. So there's still quite a few millions of people still to go with that. But we've put financial well-being on the agenda. You know, it was never a topic. When I first started the business, I would spend the first half an hour of every meeting explaining what it meant. And today people understand what it means. And for me, that's a huge success. We've kind of got that ball starting to roll down the mountain, but there is still an awful lot, an awful lot to do. But it's a lot of fun. And I'm very determined that this is a change we can make, that this can be done. So we just got to keep slogging away. And there's a lot of people, you know, you included, who've taken on this mantle and are running with the ball. And it's a big problem and it's a short day. So the more of us are involved and the more of us kind of keep pushing that snowball down, the more likely we are to achieve our objective here. And that can only be good for the people themselves, but also as a nation. It's better if we're, you know, get people out of unmanageable debt, get people away from financial, you know, distress, things like that. So I'm very optimistic that we can do it. That's what success will look like. So still a way to go.
Love that. It's still a way to go. There always is with success, isn't there? You have a pin and you keep moving that pin, but it's great to acknowledge the successes that you have had already. Financial well-being, I know, is something you're very passionate about. Can you just, for our listeners, just explain what financial well-being is and why it's important?
Yeah, we're still kind of building the language and nomenclature around financial well-being, right? So I kind of see it as the ability to know that you can withstand financial shocks and you can take advantage of financial opportunities without it impacting on your long-term financial goals. And that's very much how I kind of personally view it and define it. So I think what's been really interesting with the pandemic, kind of the health crisis aside, because obviously other people are discussing the health crisis, but the financial crisis, what COVID has really done is put a real spotlight on how precarious a lot of people's finances are. So, you know, a lot of people, had it not been for the government's kind of furlough scheme and emergency support, how many people would have lost their homes, lost their livelihoods, not be able to feed their kids? That level of financial precariousness is the exact opposite of what financial well-being looks like. So people who had some savings, people who had, you know, some emergency funds, who were low on debt, this crisis has actually been quite positive for a big group of people. And I talk a lot about kind of the K economy. And, you know, there's a lot of people on that upward trajectory who've actually had quite a good pandemic. Again, health crisis aside, obviously, but financially, you know, the markets have performed well. We're not spending money on transport. But then the people on the downward slope, those are the people that I really worry about, because how do you ever come out? Because the downward slope has its own momentum. So for me, that's where financial well-being really comes in. You can withstand a shock and you can take advantage of financial opportunity. And if people can't access £400 in a crisis, then we are not in a position of financial well-being as a nation.
Love that explanation. And with regards to the people that are on the downward slope, what kind of challenges are you seeing in your experience them facing?
Yeah, I'm genuinely worried that we've always spoken about the K recovery shape. I mean, the idea of it is quite new, but we are actually seeing an economy that is split in half. We are actually seeing two different types of recoveries for people. And my concern about the downward trajectory is it's people who were already in more financial difficulty. So again, COVID hasn't been an originator, it's been an accelerator when it comes to people's financial positions. My concern is that government is already starting to pull support away. It's not feasible for the government to continue, you know, the billions of pounds that are being spent a month to support individuals. You know, there's a whole political argument about that, but financially it's not really viable. A lot of people were in already unmanageable debt. You know, there's a lot of personal debt out there. There is not enough assets out there. Very few people have emergency funds. Very few people can tap into, you know, that emergency money. And the problem is, you know, we've seen unemployment kind of rise. A lot of jobs have disappeared, particularly jobs that young people and lower paid workers were in. So the pandemic has made worse people who were already not in a great position. Whereas if you were on a mid-level to high salary, again, you've had a great pandemic. You've come out with a higher asset base than when you went in. But if you came in already in some financial difficulty, you are now approaching financial catastrophe, if we want to kind of take a broad sweep view. And I think that that's, I mean, obviously that's very dangerous, not just on a national level, but on a human level. It's a horrible position to be in. And how do we tackle that? And it's not all about, you know, people can't budget money that they don't have. Like, we have to kind of look at big structural issues around, but the sooner we can start having that conversation, the sooner we can start tackling it.
So true. And I think that's the power of having an emergency fund. So a pot of money that can help you survive in emergency times or unforeseen events, you know, at least 3 months, I would say 3 to 6 months set aside. I think that was a game changer during COVID times, especially for people who are kind of living from hands to mouth or had a reduction in income or lost income completely. I think if emergency funds were in place, that was a game changer. I think if there was nothing in place, that's where you find yourself in a situation where potential debt is being taken on. And I find that during the kind of COVID time, a lot of people took on debt potentially without thinking about the long-term and future implications, you know, of like the bounce back loan, for instance, of what that could be taken on, you know, because there's taxes involved if it's not paid in on time, there's interest involved after a certain period of time. And I think these are the things how individuals can rack up debt and become unfinancially stable without realizing. So yes, I agree with that entirely. What would you say in terms of your journey? What would you say has been a great highlight for you throughout your years?
Wow. So I am really, really bad at stopping and just enjoying the moment. Like, I'm very bad at that. And it's one of those things I'm trying to desperately work harder on. But there's any number of things that I'm like really proud of. I mean, I think the kind of the crowning jewel of what I do is my team. And we've just welcomed another staff member today. And it's always a bit of a, okay, let's take a moment and like just kind of look at this situation. We've got these amazing, talented people who are building this amazing product for all of these people. But there's a lot of like moments as, you know, moments as we go, you know, there's accolades that you win, and there's people that, you know, want to do business with you, and that's always amazing. But we get messages from students, which for me are actually the most important bit. So things like, you know, you've changed my life, or I finally understand money, or I've helped my parents understand budgeting, and stuff like that is really we have a channel on our Slack at work, which is a client love and student love channel where we post some of these stories. And actually it's what keeps us going. Like, at the end of the day, as you know, when you run a small business, it's feeling like you're having that impact, which actually is what keeps you going. It's, you know, the money's nice. Although, I mean, I used to earn more money working at McDonald's than I earn today, doing what I do. But it's like messages from people when they say, you know, these things where you're like, okay, this is why I'm working so hard. It's for things like this. And those for me are the real moments. Those are the North Star. It's why we keep going. Because at the end of the day, people are the reason we do what we do. Right. So that for me, those are the moments that really set my heart on fire.
Love that. And I think I would class you as, you know, a very intelligent kind of financially able young individual. But if there was anything you could tell your younger self in terms of finance, what would it be?
Such a great question. I would spank that girl so hard for having so little confidence sometimes. I mean, the thing that I would tell my younger self is that, like, remaining optimistic about the future is the core thing, right? We just did a survey of students published about a month ago, I think it was, and the statistic which I found the most troubling was lack of optimism for the future. Really heartbreaking stuff. And it's things like that I would tell my younger self, like, keep believing that tomorrow is going to be better. Keep putting some money aside. Like, I'm one of those people that has a standing order, right? Every single month, a little bit of money goes into savings, a little bit of money goes into investments every single month. And some months you're like, why am I doing this? I could use the money for other things. And I would keep saying, like, keep your eye on the ball, people, keep your eye on, keep your eye on tomorrow. It's always going to be better. Just keep doing what you're doing and have faith and confidence that the future is going to be better. And I think that if there was one message I can give to young people, it's that, because optimism for the future, if you don't believe tomorrow is going to be better, at the best possible side, you're not going to save for it. At the worst possible side, we see things like self-harm and suicide, because tomorrow's, never going to be better. And so that for me is like the core message, like be optimistic about things. Things are always better. Tomorrow is always better than yesterday, and just keep moving forward. And that would be my lesson to kind of 16-year-old Vivi. Just keep on going. The spots will clear. Just keep going. Yes. Keep going forward. Keep going forward.
It's so true, and that reminds me of something that helped me get through from younger days, and something I discussed about in my new YouTube kind of first video, actually, funnily enough that you mentioned that. So I love that. I absolutely love that. Optimism is absolutely key. Just forward thinking. Yes, you can look back, but think about your future. Regardless of your current situation, where you are, you can make a change by doing things and thinking ahead and being positive. So absolutely love that. We are wrapping into the end of the session. I've got a few more questions for you. I've absolutely loved this conversation. What can we expect from Vivi in future, or Blackbullion? What can we expect?
Oh, well, we're not going anywhere. So, you'll be seeing a lot more of us all the time. We've got some new things that we're working on, which will be very exciting. But what we're really hoping to do is get financial well-being onto the agenda with equal parity to things like mental health. It still makes me a little bit puzzled and a little bit crazy that we talk about mental health without talking about finance, because to me, I don't see how you can separate those two things. And really, it's a core objective of ours to get financial well-being on the agenda, on the national agenda. Let's get talking about it. Let's stop demonizing people who don't have money. Let's stop talking about money as if it was massively complex, and let's start to break down, how to build a solid financial foundation. Getting a slightly better electricity deal is great, and getting a slightly cheaper can of baked beans is great, but actually from a long-term future point of view, we've got to talk about how you build assets. We've got to talk about financial planning. We've got to start raising the average level of conversation above how to get a good deal, because no one ever got rich by switching electricity suppliers. Like, it's a good thing, spend 40 quid a month instead of 50 quid a month, that's great, but actually let's talk about why investments are important. Let's talk about asset building. Let's talk about financial planning. Let's put this stuff on the national agenda. And that's really where you'll be seeing me and the company for the coming future.
Love that, Vivi. I feel like you have like an almost perfect answer for every question that is asked, and your passion completely shines through.
Oh, that's very sweet.
You're most welcome. It's the truth. What top 3 tips would you give to our listeners that they can improve on their finances and in their financial journey?
So the first will not surprise you to hear that I believe that if knowledge is power, financial knowledge is financial power. I notice you've got Benjamin Graham's book at the back there, the red cover. There is so much information and knowledge out there, like just grab as much of it as is humanly possible. The second tip would be start small. If you're uncomfortable with, the stock market, and this is of course assuming that you understand how it works and you're being careful and you understand your risk and all of that stuff. But if you're worried about it, start small, start with 100 quid, just get comfortable with it, get in the shallow end of it. And the third tip is just start. Because actually, if you can just get started with things, then your confidence builds over time. So obviously, manage your debt and do a budget and all of that stuff. But get started with the things that are going to make a long-term change. And you can probably start in 5 minutes, right? Like these are not massively complicated things to do. Open your ISA. The ISA resets tomorrow, right? Today's the 6th of April. So you get a new ISA allowance tomorrow. Find an ISA, set up a standing order, put 50 quid in a week, 50 quid in a month. Like, there are little things you can do, but just get started. The best time was always yesterday. The next best time is today. So just get going. And your future self really will thank you. In 6 months' time, you'll see a difference. So that's my advice.
Absolutely love that. And start small. Can we get a hint of what the amount was that you first invested when you was 15?
So from memory, it was about
if you can remember.
$250, I think. would have been about that.
There it is.
There it is. I tell people start
Yeah, which was obviously quite a large amount for a 15-year-old, but it's a fairly reasonable amount for most people who want to start out investing.
Yeah, my hourly rate at McDonald's, my first paycheck was, the hourly rate at McDonald's when I started was $4.20 an hour. So, yeah, it was like 50
so
hours.
Adding that up with not much expenses at that age, you made the most of it.
Absolutely. But you just got to start.
Yeah, you just got to start. That's so important. Love that. What's the best way people can reach out to you, Vivi, to find more information about joining your digital platform, Blackbullion, and gaining more financial education?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm easiest on Twitter or LinkedIn. My Instagram account is full of cakes, so I'm not really sure Instagram is where you want to go unless you want to see my baking. But definitely on Twitter, and blackbullion.com is the easiest way to kind of find everything else out about us. But we are kind of on all socials, so we're pretty easy to find, and there's not that many Vivis. So actually, if you just plug Vivi into Google, I'm one of the only ones that comes up, which is great.
Perfect. Don't worry, the links will be in the chat anyway, and also be in the links below, so you'll be able to access with a click of a button. Vivi, it's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to definitely divulging in and reading the rest of Stay Financially Healthy. Great book there, and yes, I look forward to connecting further. And yeah, thank you for joining the Your Financial Journey podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.